All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to unpack a really personal American story, one that sits right where three huge forces collide: immigration, language, and education. And as you'll see, these aren't separate things at all. Nope, they're all tangled up together. And they end up shaping our laws, our classrooms, and, the actual lives of millions of people.
To really get to the heart of this, we have to start with the people. The writer Jose Vargas, he lived for decades as an undocumented immigrant after his family brought him to the U.S. when he was just a kid. He nails this feeling of contradiction, this idea of being from everywhere and nowhere at once. That's not just poetry. For so many people, it's their day-to-day reality. It really forces you to look past all the politics and just see the person in the middle of it all.
And that really sets up the big question for us here. What happens when a country's founding ideals smash up against its current laws? And what happens when those laws hit people right where they live and how they see themselves and their place in the world? This is the core conflict we're going to explore.
So let's start with immigration itself. Because honestly, the United States sends some profoundly mixed signals about where it stands. It creates this confusing and often really painful reality for anyone trying to find their way through the system.
And this is where you see this massive contradiction. On one hand, you have the American ideal, the Statue of Liberty, the whole nation of immigrants idea that we're all taught. But then the reality that our sources point to is one of incredibly restrictive policies, and for a lot of people, just soul-crushing legal wait times. It's a classic case of what we say we are versus what we actually do. And this contradiction, it has a real human cost. Just think about Jose Vargas again. The guy built an amazing career as a journalist, contributing to American culture in a huge way, all while living with this constant, secret fear of his undocumented status. His story is just a perfect and honestly heartbreaking example of what it's like to give everything you have to a country that hasn't given you a secure place to even stay.
Okay, so from that big national picture, let's zoom right into the classroom, because this is where identity and policy collide every single day. And the flashpoint, more often than not, is language itself. Now, before we go any further, we need to get on the same page about one key word: dialect. A dialect is not a wrong way of speaking. It's just a distinct form of a language that's tied to a specific community or region. And the source material brings up Eboniques as a really important example, something the scholar Lisa Delpit has written a lot about.
And this brings us to this fundamental tug-of-war in education. On one side, you have people arguing that teachers should embrace and even use student dialects in class to validate their cultures and identities. But on the other side, there's a real push to make standard English the only way to speak in school, arguing it's what kids need for tests in the professional world.
Let's be real about the stakes here. When you use a student's home dialect, you're building trust. You're making them feel seen, like their culture matters. The risk, of course, is that it might not fully prepare them for a world that, for better or worse, often demands standard English. But if you only allow standard English, sure, test scores might go up, but the cost can be huge. It can send this message that a student's home language, a deep part of who they are, is somehow less than, inferior.
This all puts a really tough question on the shoulders of every single teacher. And it's one the source material asks directly. What is your responsibility here? To be a great teacher, do you need to understand the linguistic world of every kid who walks into your classroom?
And this whole debate in the classroom, it's not just about teaching styles. It forces us to ask an even bigger question, one the philosopher Paulo Freire was all about: what is education even for?
So Freire laid out these two very different models. The first is what he called the banking concept. You can just picture it. Students are like empty piggy banks, and the teacher's job is to just deposit information into their heads. But he pushed for something completely different: problem-posing education. That's where teachers and students learn together, they think critically together, and they turn education into a tool for real freedom.
And if you're thinking, okay, this is just some abstract philosophy, well, think again. The source material points to a real-life case from Arizona where a teacher's job was literally on the line because some parents complained about her accent. This is where all that theory about language and power becomes very, very real.
So what do you think? Should something as personal as an accent, a marker of your own history, your geography, should that be used to judge how effective a teacher is? This question ties Freire's philosophy right down to someone's actual livelihood.
So after wading through all these really complicated, tangled issues, it's pretty clear there are no simple answers, not at all. But the sources do give us a way to think more clearly about everything. Here's the kind of mental toolkit we can take away from all this. First, we just have to admit the contradictions exist, like the mixed messages on immigration. Second, we have to put the human stories front and center, the real experiences of people like Jose Vargas or that teacher in Arizona. And third, we have to keep asking that big question. Is the point of education just to fill heads with facts, or is it to help people find freedom?
And that leaves us right here, with this final, really powerful question. If we agree with Freire, if we believe education can be a path to freedom, then we have to face the heart of the matter. Whose language, whose dialect, whose accent gets to be the voice of that freedom? That's a question worth thinking about long after this is over.